I was distancing myself from God. He never distanced himself from me. This made it financially difficult for my brother and I growing up, and I had that insecurity. I went through some kind of periods of anxiety and just living for myself to have a fun life, all of these things, but not necessarily living with a purpose for others, or most importantly for God. Some of the joy that I would have had was gone. We knew we didn't know enough about the Lord till I was about 7 years old when I found out the very, very tragic news. My parents were getting divorced. My name is Shawn, and this is my story. I grew up about 20 miles west of Fort Worth, Texas, in a little town called Weatherford, which is not so little anymore. Both sides of my family, my grandparents were both farmers, watermelon, cantaloupe, hay haulers, hay balers, everything that you can think of. And my dad is the real deal working cowboy, was then and still is today. We spent our life, my young years, going to rodeos, trail rides, on horses, working cattle. What you would think of when you think of Texas and the Western world. That was my life, and I was happy with that till I was about 7 years old when I found out the very, very tragic news that my parents were getting divorced. They were splitting up, and it was devastating. In a second, in a moment, all of what I thought was secure was taken away from me. I think it certainly changed my childhood and my teenage years. It took some time to adjust. I dealt with a lot of nervousness. Again, always worried that something else was going to happen. I maintained a relationship with my dad, maintained a relationship with my grandparents, and so I wasn't around people who were Jewish growing up. I just wasn't. We moved into a new place. We began visiting churches, and there was a small, very small Baptist church just a couple of blocks. I remember we were near the back row with my mom and my little brother. There was just the three of us. Sunday night service at this church, which is even fewer people than on a Sunday morning, not very many people there. And then the pastor stepped down at the end, and there was some music playing, and he said, if you believe this, come to the front and tell us that this is what you believe. And I got up, and my mom, I was young, 7 years old. My mom said, you know what you're doing? You sure you want to go up? And I said, there's nothing stopping me. I'm going up and I'm talking to him right now. And again, a shy, nervous kid that never would have done that on his own. So I went to the front and I told the pastor, I believe that Jesus is the Savior. I believe that Jesus is God's Son. I believe that my sins are forgiven because of what He has done. And so that began kind of, in one sense, a new life for me. As hard as the divorce was, as much as I wouldn't want anyone to have to go through that, and again, it still affected me in many ways, but God used even that tragic event to get us to move to a place that I would be at a certain place at a certain time so that I could hear that good news presented. And so I'm thankful for that and what God did. And so here I was, and now I'm a Christian. I became a Christian when I received Jesus Christ into my life. Not because my grandparents had gone to church, not because they had been Christians, not because my mom had heard the same stories or whatever it was. It became a personal relationship that I had with God because I received that free gift of what Jesus had done. And so I started a new journey in my life. And so for a number of years, I did the things that you think Christians should do. I read my Bible, I prayed, I was active in a church, all these things that we're told that you should do. And those were good things. But by the time I got to high school, I began to do what typical teenagers do. I don't know if you've been there or not. You go through a period of time in your high school years when you're trying to do your own thing, and then suddenly one day you have access to a car, and you can go places that you couldn't go before, and you have friends. And so I kind of lived a little bit of a party lifestyle in high school. And I think part of the result was that some of the joy that I would have had was gone. And I went through some kind of periods of anxiety and just living for myself, living for my own dreams, again, to make money, to have a fun life, all of these things, but not necessarily living with a purpose for others, or most importantly for God. And so this made it financially difficult for my brother and I growing up, and I had that insecurity. And I wanted to make sure that I got into a marriage where I never divorced, and I wanted to make sure that I was financially secure, always. And so I met what was then my girlfriend, later my fiance, in high school. In college, we married, and at that time, she was a new Christian, and I was a Christian of many years, but one who was kind of doing life my own way and not really leaning into God, not trusting God. We wanted to have a better understanding. And so the best way to have an understanding who God is the Bible. So by the time I finished college, my wife and I got married in August of 2000. I graduated in December of 2000, and I was waiting to go to law school in the fall of 2001, but I never entered law school. I went to Bible college, seminary, whatever you want to call it, and began pursuing a purpose in my life that really wasn't for me. It was really His purpose in me. Now there was this internal struggle. Will I become a pastor, or will I dedicate my life to telling Jewish people and non-Jewish people that Jesus is the real Messiah? Changed my eternity forever in the future, but He's changed my purpose in life too. He's taken someone that has never met a Jewish person, as far as I know, to having Jewish friends and getting to see the culmination. I've been on a couple of tours, and now I have friends, Jewish friends, that I've gotten to develop over probably the last 12 to 13, 15 years maybe. I've had the opportunity now to make 5 trips to Israel, not with tour groups, but just my wife and I by ourselves, exploring the land together, meeting friends, getting to better understand people, listening to people, having conversations about the Lord with people who had experienced what these folks had experienced. And not to read about it in a book now, but to literally talk face to face. I know that you have a story, and it may not be divorce, it might be something else. It might just be that you live life and you just feel like you just exist. God has a purpose in your life. So listen, I realized that God has called me to be a pastor, and that's what I am today, 20 plus years as a pastor, but He's also always called me to be someone who loves Israel, who stands for Israel, and wants to share the gospel, the good news of Jesus, with anyone that will hear. And according to my Bible, it's to the Jew first, and then also to every Gentile that will listen. My name is Shawn, and this is my story.